So I am now going to introduce Janice and Nikki, who are doing our program. Janice Zarro is just awesome. She is a former president of IWF, Florida Suncoast. She came from the DC chapter originally. She's a lawyer, a former corporate nonprofit executive. And I love her career in Capitol Hill. She tells great stories. We know her probably best locally because she was leader of the Women's Resource Center in Sarasota. Janice's favorite title is Nicole's aunt. Nicole is our other presenter, Nicole Spiotta, and she has a background in student athletic programs. She has a master's of education in sports management, and currently she is a sports manager specializing in softball for BSN Corporation, the largest distributor of team sports equipment and apparel in the US. And her favorite title is Janice's Great Niece. So Janice, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
I want to welcome all the IWF members and guests. It's a pleasure for, we have baby boomers, we have Gen Xers, and we have millennials. So it should be a great conversation. Nikki and I are just so pleased to share our experiences, our tips, our insights on women and failure, and particularly focusing on the feelings of failure. We all experience failure, professionally and personally. But just like unwanted pregnancies and monthly menstruation, we don't talk about it. We don't really talk about the feelings that come with failure. So for the next 45 minutes, join in a Stilettos and Sneakers intergenerational conversation as we turn the prism on failure and share our experiences.
Well, thank you very much for that lovely introduction, everybody. I'm going to refer to my aunt as my Aunt Janice throughout this presentation. It makes me a little uncomfortable referring to her as Janice. So if you hear Aunt Janice, I am talking about Janice Zarro. So a quick little plug here. Something that we've been working on over our time together is our social media platform. And the reason why is because we found that through conversation, that's where you really get the most out of Stilettos and Sneakers. So you'll see here, and after this presentation, you'll get all of this information as well. But we have a number of different platforms on social media that you can visit and get more information about not only just Stilettos and Sneakers, but some of our topics and some conversations. So you see here, we have LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and our main place is really our website. And you'll see a number of our topics and some things that we reference to this evening on these platforms, especially our emails if anyone needs to get in touch with us personally. Something I do want to just do a quick referral to, we're talking about a number of different generations in our conversation this evening, and there's also a number of generations present here. So we have your baby boomers, which are from 1946 to 1964. And no, you don't have to, tell anybody your age on this. I know we don't need to talk about that. But you have your Gen X's from 1965 to 1980. You have your millennials, which is the perspective that I'm speaking from, is 1981 to 2000. And you have Gen Z's from 2001 to 2020. So let's first talk about why we're here. So one thing that we realized through our conversations and really developing Stilettos and Sneakers is the importance of coping skills and how those coping skills, they lead to the development of resiliency. So you'll find through a lot of our topics the correlation between how those coping skills really have built a resilient leader, resilient woman in the both of us.
Talk about the deep gut punch of a failure. And that feeling you get when you're suffocating. And for me, and the experience I want to share, happened in the late 80s. I was vice president of government affairs, state and federal, for Avon products. I was an officer in the company. I had everything. I was flying high. I had the corporate apartment in New York that the company gave me. I had the car. I had the life insurance policy for $1 million if something happened. I had the operation I ran, had a beautiful operation for government affairs in Washington, D.C. I had just been in Fortune magazine with 4 other women who were leading. It was rare to lead a government operations for a major company. I was just in the Wall Street Journal, and the Chamber of Commerce had just done a story on me. It's great. It was fabulous. And it ended in 30 seconds when the general counsel flew to Washington, D.C. and said, "We are eliminating your position. We're outsourcing government affairs." And I was gut punched and devastated. How did I handle I perceived this as a failure. How did I handle it? Terribly. I did everything wrong. I isolated. I did not reach out. I didn't see any of the stakeholders that I had dealt with. And from my perspective, it was a real failure.
Another reason why we're here today, actually why we're not here today, is we're not here to talk about how you can turn a failure into a success. You'll hear a number of personal experiences throughout this presentation and through our further conversations when we go into breakout groups. But something that we're not here to tell you is, how can you turn a failure into success? I feel like that seems to be a common misconception when you hear the word failure and you hear this topic. So that's something that's important for everyone to understand, that it's one thing we're not here for.
We want to understand the failure and what caused it. And we need to get rid of the phrases, which happened to me when I got the deep gut punch. Why didn't I see it coming? I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. And we really need to stop those phrases. And really, and we're going to talk about this a little later, when you get that failure and understanding its cause, look at the systems that you're in. What are those power systems? And there are power systems in relationships, in families, but there are also power systems in the workplace when you may hit a bump in the road.
And finally, the reason why we're here today is to learn how to remove the personalization behind all of this. You'll hear from personal experiences, and you yourselves will even get to share, whether you're sharing it with just yourself or with the group. And there's obviously a personal connection to all of this, and that's really how you get to understand the failure and its causes and how to develop those coping skills. But how do we remove the personalization where we don't let it completely disable us? And it allows for us to understand its cause and move forward.
And that this all began from a generational perspective. I'm the baby boomer. Nikki was the millennial, and I'll call her Nikki because I call her that instead of Nicole. You'll hear that. But let me share with you what happened as we gathered our material, wrote our own commentary. You'll hear about interviews we did with several women. We began to understand and realize that even though we were born decades apart, that as we shared those experiences, we began to bridge a communication gap that we had.
Something else that we realized when just talking with one another is that there's a number of other generations out there that could absolutely contribute to this conversation. So how did we go about getting more information to kind of build on our personal experiences? So what we did is we went out and we interviewed well over 100 women from different generations. We had a basic questionnaire, but really, this was pre-COVID, so we were in coffee bars, just restaurants, and we were able just to talk to other women. And what we found and what we came across were a lot of those similarities that helped bridge that communication gap. So what we did, and if anyone has time to, after this, to go see our website, for each topic that we have and that we've discussed and that we go into detail about, we came up with tips and tricks for each topic. And the reason why we did this was not only just to relate them back to our personal experiences, but kind of expand the topic grounds.
Some of the things we discovered in terms of common ground, Nikki and I may use the same words or different words, but we often have different approaches. Let me give you some examples. We spent a lot of time, and some of the baby boomers out here might really relate to this. We spent a lot of time with the concepts, is it important to be likable or is it important to be respected? Well, from a baby boomer perspective, if you were, and I'm looking at faces out here, if you were often the first woman I came in at a law. It was predominantly male. It was tough. You won at all costs. I mean, you kept it legal, but you had to win. There is no question that being respected was far more important to me than being liked. Now, as I sit here before you today, I paid a price for that. I think I would perhaps, we don't get to push the reset button, but that respect issue was critical for me. Not true for millennials. I mean, they came through technology, and you have all that Facebook stuff, which I don't understand, of likes and who likes you and this and that. And it's a very different approach to those words. Another word that we use, Nicole and I use it all the time. Boy, does it mean very different things. And that's being authentic. Authenticity. Oh my goodness, if I was ever authentic and in my career said what I thought, expressed my values, did what, I would have been fired. You couldn't do it. So I had two personalities. I had the Janice who was professional at the office and conducted myself a certain way. And then I had a personal Janice. When millennials, and Nikki uses the word authenticity, that's one personality. They bring it to the office and they want to find places to work that allows them to be authentic. Bless Sheryl Sandberg. Loved her book, Lean In. Think she did a tremendous value and contribution to women, but I'm not sure that would have worked. So that part is very different.
So you'll hear us refer to the 8 topics of stilettos and sneakers throughout this presentation, and these topics they kind of trickle in different points that we make. But if you look over to the left side of the screen here, you'll see the topics that we really focus on are self-confidence, hard and soft skills, public and private failures, relationships, non-traditional women, life choices, and the extended Italian American family. And something to think about here is we originally, when we first started, we only had 4 topics. But when we met with our editor, we were able to expand upon that. And even through our interviews as well, we found that so many different topics actually correlated with finding that balance between the 2 generations and that played on our background. So as all of you know, my aunt has obviously a corporate DC background, and mine is athletics. So that's where some of these other topics like non-traditional women were able to develop as we continued writing and continued speaking to other people. So like we said, this is based off of personal experiences. All of our content is, we would like to make sure that everyone understands that the insights are not academic or scientific. Really, everything does come from personal experiences that we write about, interviews with other women, and then also commentary. If anyone does follow us on social media, you'll see we always use the hashtag join the conversation, because really that's how our conversations develop. That's how our content develops. And we really pride ourselves on that, because we're working with people, everyday people, trying to just expand on the conversation.
How did we get started? What caused this whole discussion on failure between us? It was the defeat of Hillary Clinton. And it was the realization that we came at this defeat very differently. And please understand, we'll take the politics out of it, whether one was for or against. That's not what the defeat meant to me. When Hillary Clinton was defeated, I felt devastated, but it was just a repudiation of everything that I had taught in my business etiquette and executive presence class. I had mentored for decades, still do. It was a repudiation of what I taught in that. And it was basically, I always said, be prepared, be more qualified than everybody else, move in the chairs, look the part, watch your tone and your communication skill. And here was, in my opinion, someone who did all of that. And, at that point, I looked at it as a failure. And then a second part of the failure was, and here's the baby boomer in me, I really expect the kind of sisterhood or womanhood to come together in support, and they didn't. I mean, they maybe came out to march after the election, but there was not that basis of support. So I was devastated.
So, as my aunt had said, this isn't necessarily describing political views, and none of our material really talks about politics either. But really, what it was for me, and the reason why I was devastated, was more because of the fact that it was a woman's presence who had done everything right. And I felt like a lot of the teachings and expectations that were set for her were set for a lot of millennials, as far as following in the baby boomers' footsteps, making sure you're doing everything right, checking all your boxes off, following everything accordingly. And then when you get to the end, you get the promotion, you get the reward. And she didn't see that. And that's where it took for me to take a step back, especially in a field where it is mostly male dominated, which is athletics, thinking, oh no, I've been told the same things, following all the right steps, doing everything I'm supposed to do. When it comes time to that promotion, am I gonna hit that wall? And if I do, is it actually a failure? So something that I looked at was really from a sports perspective. I looked at it as there's failed opportunities. So in softball, as a catcher, if I made an error, if I made a throwing error, I failed that opportunity. But there were a number of other ways that I could contribute to the success of the game, or maybe to the win, or to help us, move along as a team. Maybe I, hit the winning run in, or maybe I end up making a really great double play, saving us from losing in the end. So what I looked at it was, although there was a failed opportunity for a woman to take the next step into a power position, I found that it opened a number of doors and other opportunities for success for more women, for generations of women, and especially the younger generations like the millennials and Gen Zs who were learning from those experiences.
One of the things that also came about as we looked at the material and the interviews, and which I was made a great impression on me, were the implicit biases that are really among the different generations of women. I can't tell you, and here are the expressions. Oh, she's in your face. She's a disruptor. She's not learning the history of the institution that she's in, or the company, what the company's all about. Oh my God, those tattoos, those rings in her nose. She just doesn't dress right. I mean, when you really start focusing in on the different generations of women, we really have a lot of implicit biases against each other.
One question that we asked from the very beginning, and we continue to do this today, is what barriers are we responsible for putting up? I'm sure most of you have heard, you can only control what you can control. And something that I realized in athletics, when, being in a team sport especially, no matter whether you are best friends with the person or not, you need to work hand in hand with the person next to you in order to find success for everybody. So something I've always asked for, both professionally and personally, is what barriers am I responsible for putting up, or some of my team members, that we could avoid, that we could knock down, so that we're able to bridge that communication gap much easier and much more efficiently. So where did this take us is the next part. It's basically been a 5-year discussion on the word failure. It's a feeling that something we believe women rarely discuss. And, I know my aunt can contribute to this. Everyone has told us to stay away from this word. Some people are very confused by it. Some people, I do believe, fear it. Even our editor, when we first went with our material, was very concerned about the word failure, didn't really want it to be something that stood out. But what we have found really through all of this time is that the word failure is what makes Stilettos and Sneakers unique, because we're able to talk about it and use it to our advantage and find ways to become resilient and stronger and better business and personal people, versus fearing the word.
And I think the biggest goal of to share is that we really have to learn from each other. We happen to be focusing right now on baby boomers and millennials, but that was it. What happened to us, and we believe as people participate in this conversation, they can also learn from each other as well.
And just to go off of that too, not only can we learn from one another, we're developing better personal and professional resiliency. And we've learned that through every conversation. So that's almost an expectation from Stilettos and Sneakers that you can take away from us, is that, you are building a stronger resiliency.
Material all the interviews, everything we've done thus far, we wanted to really smush it down and leave you with, well, what were some of your common ground? What did you learn? And we basically boiled it down and agreed on three things. The first are soft skills. Nicole and I both agree that soft skills are extremely important. But let me share with you the different backgrounds and perspective. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. My dad was a factory union worker. I know picket lines. Mom was a homemaker. We lived in a rented 2-story tenement. And every summer, I went to Camp Stoop. Does anybody know what camp? Yeah, I see some smiles. Camp Stoop is what every city kid who I guess we were poor, you just sit on the stoop and watch the neighborhood go by. So for me, when I had to cope with soft skills, it was when my legal career began, it was as elementary as knowing what fork to use and what spoon to use. It was as elementary as knowing, well, how do I write this thank you note? And it was in levels, to finally knowing how to act on the corporate jet when you're flying with the CEO, where you're supposed to sit and what you say when you exit. So soft skills was learned behavior with books and being a sponge soaking up. For Nicole, that's a very different life. She grew up upper middle class. She went to private camp in upstate New York at 10 years old for several years. She had all Title IX. I had no Title IX. I'd never played sports. She had ballet lessons, even though she hated them. But the whole social skills is just not even an issue. It's second nature to her. But she has issues of social skills that she grapples with now in the workplace. As a millennial, remote learning, there's a whole set of skills that fall into that soft area. So vulnerability, oh, this is a good one. We both agree this is a key issue, but you are looking at an unapologetic baby boomer who thinks being vulnerable is being weak. I know that's not true. I read a lot of Dr. Brene Brown. I'm a disciple of her. Dare to lead, you have to be vulnerable, trust, shame. I get the whole thing. This is very hard. And as a leader, I think you have to have the answers, the solution. Yes, you ask the right questions. But for millennials in Nicole's world, vulnerability and trust in the workplace, they do things as a team. The leader admits the vulnerability so they could get a solution together. So we're on different pages. The jury's really out for me on vulnerable. I'm evolving, but this is a key issue. And then finally, this last one, unspoken expectations. We can go on for 8 hours. Nikki and I have spent time. I failed this miserably. I failed it culturally in the 60s when I didn't want the husband, the picket fence, and the kids. I then failed it in the Catholic Church when I was pro-choice and I didn't understand why women couldn't be priests. And then I failed with my own parents, who were the sweetest, dearest, most wonderful, but they would say they had failed because I didn't go to the all-girl Catholic college that my sister went to. And instead I chose in 1969, Rutgers, the state university, which was a hotbed of activism. And so anyway, and with picket lines and whatnot. So these are the three common grounds. Christina Uncle, who's on this, is going to be facilitator, told me that a millennial always wants to know, what are they going to get out of it? Is this a valuable session for their time? So this is the most important part of the power slide. It's the takeaways. And this is, please hear, see, and value where women are and not where you believe they should be at. This is really critical. And don't tell me what's in your heart. You believe all women should be equal. You're powerful women. It's what are your actions? And what are you doing in your world to make sure women get advanced?
The takeaway that we have found for you all is communication. You hear that word a lot, you hear the importance of it, but really it is a key when you're confronting a failure. if you have the ability to communicate with yourself and others, it really helps you understand and experience an evolution of yourself from the failure. So, as we stated earlier, you're not learning how to succeed necessarily, but you're learning really how to communicate with not only what the failure is, understanding what it means, but just being able to evolve as a person. And then that takes you right into finding that balance. So, a question that we want you to ask yourselves after this is, what does balance look like for you post the COVID pandemic? So, something I'll say is that prior to the pandemic, obviously millennials and the younger generations benefited from going completely remote because we've grown up with technology. And something that people would actually expect really in the millennial generation is that work-life balance and having the ability to take advantage of both. Well, now because of COVID, everything is blended, right? You have the benefits of technology being used every single day and advancing, and you have that work-life balance all the time. They're together, they come hand in hand. But now some people are looking at post-pandemic that you have to go back and separate all those things. Some companies are saying that they don't mind having people work remotely. Like mine, for example, I used to have to be in the office, and my company told me I will never have to go back in. As a millennial and someone who's very much likes working from home and on the computer, I have no problem with that. But you'll see a lot of statistics show that a lot of baby boomers are deciding that they want to retire a little bit early because this is not the professional work experience that they expected. So, how do you find that balance every day? And then also, how do you find that balance after a pandemic?
Finally, embracing the need to understand power. If I could have my dream, I would start teaching how to analyze, seize power, challenge it, and understand it to girls from high school, college, and in every graduate study program, because I think this is absolutely critical. We're hearing a lot about the systemic power of racism and police departments, etc. I think we have to really, as women, all generations of women, really understand the power that we're up against. Do we have any time for questions, Mary? You're the gatekeeper.
I think we're fine. We're
Okay.
running a little over, but I think we'll catch up.
Janice, you know, when you were, when the chairman came and said your position was eliminated and you felt it was failure, I don't really see that as failure. I mean, that's decision beyond you.
That is true, Kay, and I went back and forth with my editor on this. It wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't a failure, but I had all the feelings that it was my fault, and that I was so devastated. Everything, my identity was taken away, and so I treated it as a personal, humiliating failure. And I tested this out with a colleague. In fact, she's an IWF member, great labor lawyer, Laura Bellows in Chicago. She does transactions of people who leave companies. She's an employment lawyer. And she says, the worst ones in dealing with this still are women, because they just take it on and they can't see that it's a business decision. There was a takeover. There are other things other than their own personal.
Right. And if I can just comment on that, Janice, being in executive search and talking to individuals who might be exploring because their roles were eliminated and mine was eliminated once, you feel like you did something that might have triggered, or that if you would have been a better performer, even though you're a really good performer, I think it's natural for many women and males to feel like they failed and that they're no longer there. And you do have to go through that emotional mourning kind of stage of, like, you know, reflection and feeling, whatever those, there's like 7 of them. And then you finally have acceptance at the end. And I know Laurel very, very well, and she deals with a lot of senior executives who go through this. So even though it's in retrospect, it was a business decision or reorganization or whatever, you do feel like you failed. That's very, very common.
And we don't talk about it.
And we don't talk about it.
We don't talk about it.
We're going to be talking about it tonight. It's time for our breakout groups. And the way this will work is each of you have been assigned to groups. And the groups are timed. As soon as I start the group, it will go for 15 minutes. You will get a 1-minute warning that it's counting down, where we'll all be rejoined into the main group. Janice, did you want to say anything else about the breakouts?
Just that your facilitator has picked the question. We thought this would save time. And Nick, you want to talk a little bit about generational differences real quick?
Sure. So one of the topics is generational differences in the workplace. And what we focused on here is really how do generational workforce differences affect our ability to manage people? Something that we found is that, you know, both of us, my aunt and I, are very strong leaders. We're both women in different industries that we work in, but we lead very, very differently. And that can affect, you know, your work relationships if you don't know how to communicate appropriately, or if there's certain things that you're just missing because you don't understand the generational difference. So that's really the key takeaway from your topic is how can you focus on that, and then how can you end up working together and handle those situations to benefit everybody.
Leadership styles is all about how to create mutual respect between the different generations of women. Perfect example, we've got baby boomer, a little older than baby boomer, traditionalist, Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, fighting with and in conflict and tension with Congresswoman AOC, who's a millennial. In the sports world, you've got Megan Rapinoe, who's terrific at soccer with her dropping the F-bomb and wearing her purple hair, but a fabulous supporter of women's equality and equity. And then you've got Kim Negg, who's the new Marlin general manager, who does it by the book with her pinstripe suit, plays with the boys, but successful. And finally, we talked a little bit before about vulnerability and authenticity and that role in dealing with failure. How do you reflect but not self-sabotage?
Here we go. I'm about to open all the breakout rooms.
I was going to ask you, do you see more women, really, like their sports announcers who are more women, their coaches and referees? I mean, do you see that breaking through for more women now?
I do, especially in, I would say, some of the male sports that have complementary female sports to them. So you'll see a lot more women who are joining the baseball scene. You'll see a lot more women joining the NBA. And obviously you see some of the women that are now becoming refs in the NFL. So for me and the athletic divisions, what I see is that once they break into sports like the baseballs, the footballs, the basketballs, they are able to just open the doors for some of those other sports and some of those other leadership roles within athletics. And it's been, you know, we've gotten to hear from a number of those women speak. They've come and spoken to us at some conferences, and it's amazing now because they're creating their own leadership training programs to have women kind of follow in their footsteps, which is just expanding the amount of women participating at that level.
Can we give each facilitator a real brief amount of time to just say what?
Sure.
There's three, so you go first.
Okay, well, we had a nice discussion, and we talked about how sort of generational differences show up in the workplace, and how some of the younger generations are starting to figure out how to bring their authentic selves to a situation without sort of compromising their ability to be effective and successful. We talked about making sure that communication is key, that, you know, sharing our stories, sharing our perspectives bridges those gaps. We talked about how you know, boomers were uncomfortable historically sharing their personal lives, and, you know, millennials and Gen Z are much more open to doing that. And then someone suggested that it's important to understand who your audience is, and then tailor your message to the things that would be important to that person in order to effectuate an outcome that you would be excited about. And we talked about failure and how boomers kind of personalize it, and millennials seem to be a little bit better about sort of being more objective about it, which can be perceived by boomers not to take responsibility. So that's another area that requires bridging. Millennials and Gen Xers are more open to sharing information about mistakes and failures, and about other things as well. Like we talked about how boomers never used to talk about how much money they made, and millennials and Gen Xers might. So there's just a whole much more openness. So we had a a nice conversation. We all agreed it's important to learn from each other.
How about Sherry?
Okay, hey, group 2, we talked about leadership styles and our main goal about mutual respect and understanding women in our different leadership styles. And it was great because I think ultimately most of the group, we talked about different ways of doing things. Nikki talked a lot about, the differences between Janice and her, about having an open door policy, one of them, and then modeling behavior. And I thought another common theme, like Felice just said, was Michelle brought up communications being the key, talking, making sure that we're always keeping each other in the loop. And it was really, really, really an important aspect of leadership. And we did talk a little bit about biases. I'm going to boil that down into, we talked about learning how to give it up, making sure that as a baby boomer, you realize you've had your time, you've done and you've achieved things, and be satisfied with what you achieved, and that people already recognize that, and that you can give that up to millennials so that they're able to then bring forward their leadership style. A lot of listening. We talked about how important listening is now that from a baby boomer standpoint, you have the style of being able to be a little bit more forceful. And I thought it was really interesting how Janet talked about her experiences as being one of the first women in even an all male board. And she talked about wanting to be perfect. And I think every single woman on this complete board is probably, no matter what age you are, you want to be perfect, but knowing that you don't have to be perfect, and that you're not going to be judged by but by the decisions that you make. And then we talked about also the very, very important style of coaching and carrying on the mentorship, whether you do that formally in a business or your own consulting, or whether you just do that as an individual and as a person. And then also we talked about how difficult where you're at in the market right now is, looking at that area that some of us are in the Sarasota area, it being kind of a small market, and there are still some biases there. So group 2 had a lot of great lively discussion, and then we talked a lot about the sports arena with Nicole's help. So thank you.
In the group, in group 3, if we did raise your hand, but I think we were post-millennial all the way up to pre-baby boomer. Perhaps I'm describing myself, we'll see. Anyway, we looked at failure, vulnerability, authenticity, dealing with failure and power structure. And so we were looking from the standpoint of a fair amount of collective failure. There was no one in the group that had not experienced a significant failure that they really struggled with. One of our members says, has any woman not felt this? I think there may be some other women who've not dealt with this, but I doubt it, because we were all sharing significant events in our careers in which we felt the huge impact of failure, or what we perceived as failure. And basically what we ended up with was a real appreciation for our collective resilience, which I will take the liberty of saying is there. It's conditioned in us, probably because we are women to begin with, but also because we are or have been women in the workplace, and we've had to develop resilience over the years. And so our group, in their discussions about their experiences, demonstrated great resilience and creativity in dealing with their perceptions of failure in their careers. One of us said it's the attitude after a disappointment that counts. Yes, we're going to be disappointed. It's the attitude, the response that we give that will determine if we at that point can move forward and do well, or if we retreat into a corner and don't do well. The person in our group that was probably the youngest said she decided, after having missed several promotions that she was going to ask for feedback and why it mattered if she didn't get something that she wanted, that she was not going to wait to be given feedback. She was going to ask for it. That was a large lesson in her career. And so that may be coming fairly close to what those of us who are more senior in the group didn't bring up. So that may be edging a little bit towards the millennial perspective there. A couple of us are big fans of Brene Brown and her discussions about being vulnerable and being aware of our vulnerability and open to it. Several of us talked about the importance of sisterhood and how if we are able to open up whenever we are disappointed, we allow others to support us and help us, and also to understand that others have been or certainly will be in the same disappointing situations that we've experienced. We all said it's easy to look internally and say, what did I do wrong? Because we tend to take personal responsibility for things that we cannot control, as well as things that we do control. And white men don't think things through in the way that women and people of color do when they have to deal with disappointments, because they're carrying privilege. And so that is a quality, unfortunately, because we don't have that privilege or have not historically had that privilege. Unfortunately, that's resiliency is something that we've had to develop, but it also is a strength and makes us better leaders, and is something that, as I mentioned in the beginning, has become a quality that we've had to develop and is probably innate in women in the workplace because of that, and something to be aware of and confident about, and to realize that we have it, and to also help others to realize that they have it.
With Christina.
Well, Carol delivered a great speech, so I'm not going to share how I'm going to follow that one up. But I did want to follow up with if it was Janet that we were talking about, whether she's perfect or not. She's already checked that off. She's perfect, so she's good to go. You've succeeded, Janet. Our group spoke about leadership styles and how do we create those mutual respects and understandings among women based on different leadership styles themselves, as well as the different generational gaps. And we really hit on 4 kind of different key takeaways. And I like how everyone spoke ahead and had mentioned a couple of things that we had hit. So obviously things integrate and they go. And the first one is kind of the external factor. And I know in our group, they mentioned it, and I think it's a good thing to hit, because it's something I think we all overlook, is how our society now does value those who speak out, who are the loudest, who have an answer the quickest. So we were talking about leadership styles of those who are more reflective, who may not be the first ones to raise their hand or the first ones to say something in a meeting, but it's not because they're scared or they have nothing to contribute. It's just a different style of leadership, that they're more reflective. So we were talking about that for quite a bit, and how do we essentially change our cultural our institutions now, who like instant gratification now that we have technology and we get answers right away. We want people to generate answers right away. How do we kind of change that perspective and bring those individuals up to the front? And I know Angela had a really great point where she said she has a couple of those people on her team, or when she has meetings, where she has decided to start giving, whether it's the agenda ahead of the time or a prompt question, or essentially the subject of what they're going to be speaking about, and kind of giving that individual heads up so they can marinate on the topic and be ready to speak at that meeting with the other individuals that love to just speak right out of the gate, so that those discussions are had a little bit ahead of time. So that was one of our main topics that we addressed. The second one, which I agree with, and it kind of comes down to that trailblazer, many of you who were the first in those corporate rooms. And so it's that leadership style of where probably, I would say my generation being millennial, we walk into a room, I think someone had said it was great, like, you guys are lucky to have us in the room. And those ahead of us are like, you should just feel lucky that you're in the room, right? So, because they had to work so hard to get into the room, and the doors are already essentially, because of, the work that was done ahead of time, have already been opened. that we can't either one fully appreciate it or grasp it. So how do we get to that different mindset with women leaders, of those who said, you know, I had to basically claw my way in, prove my way in, work these many hours, and then you guys are coming in and saying, I'm here, you're lucky to have me, and here's all my ideas and thoughts. And so how do we have that where we don't have that animosity between those two different kind of perspectives? And I know her and I had spoken about like even financial funding. We did speak about this in our group about how it's just interesting to see those who actually do a lot of fundraising and donations, that a lot of women, senior women actually don't give a lot of money who do have, because maybe they've worked so hard to make that money. They don't like to freely give to it, even for women causes at times. So that was one conversation, is like understanding that perspective from either or. We can't come in saying you're lucky to have us, knowing that there's people that are ahead of us who didn't have it as, I wouldn't even say as easy, but obviously who didn't have it as easy as we did coming in. And so having that, respect that way as well, but also knowing that there's going to be the generation behind me who's going to be even worse than me. I'm going to use that loosely, and that's a good thing because that's progress. But to always keep that into kind of perspective. The third other topic that we had was essentially, and Angela hit this again, was tradition, right? How do we not lose things that we love from the older generation, but then add our tradition into it, or things that we have? Angela hit it really good where she said, effectively that you can't carry all the traditions of the generations ahead of us and then expect to bring our own, because we'd just be too overwhelmed. So how do we have those conversations of what's the best and finding that balance between old traditions and new traditions coming up in the workplace to be the most effective for the context and where we're going? And last but not least, and we were really getting into this, and I know that Kathleen was really doing a really good job into, unfortunately, we were talking a little bit too much, but it was a good thing, is effectively, how do we not lose millennials? And it's that conversation you all had about communication. How do we not lose millennials who, we want to have that conversation, whether it's clothing attire, right? Necessarily, right? We think it might be business casual. And you guys are like, no, that's not even close. How do we have those conversations with not in a respectful way and opening that door? So we had just started getting into that, which I thought was a really good topic, because it's from women who do want to lead younger women through that leadership style, but then are afraid that they're going to be taken as they're overbearing or they're micromanaging, when in true sense, they're just trying to teach those soft skills. So
my aunt and I have those conversations all the time about attire.
This has been a fabulous session. I want to really thank Janice and Nicole for
Thank you all
going
very
into
much.
it.
Participate.
Great
Thank you.
participation, everybody. I feel really uplifted by this whole session. I hope you do too. I didn't have a chance to